Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hockey Hub. Episode 54. We'll call it an Adam McQuaid episode. Adam Pellerin, Judd Sirott, Andy Brickley. Just back home from the last road trip that we will go on this season. I can't believe it. They got one more road game, but it's a national game, so it's the last time we got to be on the road together, boys. How about that?
It's disappointing.
Yeah.
It's disappointing. You'd like to at least get one round of the playoffs and, one more last road trip where the fun season starts. Qualifying for the postseason is the goal of every team at the beginning of the year. And I think we all expected Boston to be inside the top 16. Didn't go that way this year.
Anytime you hear the birds chirping and the Masters is just about to start, it's usually the best time of year, and it is unfortunate the Bruins, for the first time in 9 seasons, are not going to participate.
Yeah, the streak ends. The Maple Leafs, of course, qualified for the postseason, so their streak is at 9. It's the longest streak in the National Hockey League, and it's looking like, guys, for the first time ever, the 4 American teams, the U.S. teams, part of the original 6, are not going to be in the postseason. Which is crazy, right? The Blackhawks, the Red Wings, the Rangers, and the Bruins. Rangers still alive, I believe, as we record this, but their playoff hopes are fading fast, as are the Red Wings as well.
And 3 of those teams, Adams, if I can jump in.
Sure.
They were right in it, Bruins included,
Yep.
Up until the last, a couple of weeks. But, Chicago wasn't going to make it. I think that was understood. They're still in that rebuild. But, Rangers, Detroit, Boston, they all had their opportunities to put a little win streak together and couldn't put it together.
And a lot of them, just to add on to that, Brick, they all had some opportunities head-to-head against Montreal, and they reeled off each of their last 6.
Yep. So that is the story, and looks like you're going to have 2 Canadian teams in that final wild card spot. You got the Senators, who've already clinched, and the Canadians, who are back in the postseason for the first time since they went to the Cup final a few years back. So that is the story for the postseason. I just want to say this before we get into the Bruins win. Nice win over the Devils. It was nice to have a great game to watch. A lot of different storylines unfolding in that one. I'm a fan of Buffalo. I like going to Buffalo. And I think a lot of people look at the schedule and they would look at, all the destinations, right? And they'd say, Toronto, New York, and West Coast, Western Canada, all great places. I like going to Buffalo.
All right, give me your 5 top reasons why you like going to Buffalo.
All right, I like going to Buffalo because I like the location of our hotel in terms of, getting breakfast and lunch. And I like the location of the hotel based on where the rink is. The rink's not far down the street. I like, it's more logistical for me, Brick, I guess, is what I'm getting at here. Because when you get to the rink, right, and when you're a ringside reporter, you get there and you got a studio and you got your host position, and sometimes the studio is not close to the host position. You got to walk all the way around, or maybe the host position's in the Zamboni section. And so people who watch the games may not be too familiar with all the traffic that you can have in the Zamboni position, right? Because you got the Zamboni itself.
It sounds like he's lazy.
No, I just like to be catered to.
Logistics, not a long walk.
Yeah.
Recency bias. You weren't there with 3 feet of snow and the wind blowing 40 miles an hour. Then you're not going for that walk for coffee. You hope that the hotel can provide everything for you because you're not going outside.
There are also some favorable destinations close to the hotel as well in terms of dinner, nightlife. So I appreciate that. So anyway, that was my little side note on Buffalo. Well, hey, listen, Z knows where it's at.
It wasn't up until as recent as a couple of years ago that I actually realized that the Erie Canal begins in Buffalo, right outside the arena.
Is that right?
See, did you just learn that now?
I did.
I didn't know that either.
Wow. Put that's another plus in the
I'm here
Buffalo
to educate
category.
you, too.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
It's now 6 great reasons to go to Buffalo.
Exactly.
That's right.
So there you
Erie
go.
Canal, the 10th wonder of the world.
Excellent. All right, so let's get to the things didn't go well in Buffalo, and I think Buffalo is part of this conversation because of how it unfolded, right? Sabres, they've been hot. Give them credit. They came back and beat the Bruins, but the Bruins got off to a 2-0 lead in that game. And again, the second period rearing its ugly head. Bruins give up the 4 goals. They end up losing that game 6-3, despite retaking the lead in the second period from the Sabres when they scored 2 unanswered, and they end up losing 6-3. And then you get to New Jersey, and the same thing. A 2-0 lead in the first period, and then they extended to a 3-0 lead, and they got off to a great start in the second period. You had the pushback from the Devils, but the Bruins were able to hang on. And I think, you in your conversation with Joe Sacco, which we'll hear coming up in a little bit, Brick, you pointed to the timeout in the second period and the sort of, the hitting the reset button. And so after that, the Bruins tilted the ice back in their favor.
Well, it was 2 feel-good wins that surrounded that performance in Buffalo, and the performance in Buffalo was indicative of the way the season has gone over the last month and a half. There are ways to find to lose games. You mentioned a good start, and it's the same guys that are scoring. The offense is coming from basically the same guys at that point. You get that 2-0 lead, and then it's about sustainability, and then the same bad habits and the same mistakes creep into your game. And when you play a team like Buffalo that has talent offensively, they got really good forwards, they got an active D, they have skill, they have talent. It's amazing that they don't have a better playoff, push over the last whatever it's been now, 14, 15 years, that they haven't been able to get into the postseason because they have skill. It's almost inexplicable why they're not right there knocking on the door to get into the postseason. So the goals against don't surprise me given the way the Bruins have played and the talent that Buffalo has. But it was indicative of the way the season has gone for Boston in terms of how they found ways to lose hockey games.
Well, I think in looking at both of those games, whether it's Buffalo or New Jersey, I think, yes, and this is some of the stuff that Brick and I talked about off the top last night in New Jersey, that, yes, you get an opportunity to see some of the physical attributes of your players, whether they can skate, how they handle the physicality, what pace do they kind of play with. But I think in the bigger picture, and this goes to Brick's larger point, and it also impacts, I think, the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres are not missing the playoffs because they don't have enough talent. They're missing the playoffs because they don't have the right leadership, the fortitude. They don't have the right mental components up and down that roster. It's pretty simple, and that's what a lot of Sabres people will tell you. That's why they haven't made the playoffs. So as we kind of switch to the Bruins, you get a much better feel for what your players are like. What is their mental makeup like? Can they dig in those situations? In Buffalo, and we can take this to New Jersey, but in Buffalo, okay, you're up 2-0. You squander that lead. You're up 3-2 just before you hit the second intermission. So there's not an instance where your head coach, Joe Sacco, can call a timeout. He doesn't need to at that point. He's about to head into the intermission. You're 3-3. You're still in a good spot heading into the third period. And I think a lot of coaches, and we can take a look at this in a bigger picture as far as the Bruins are concerned, if you're in a 3-3 tie on the road, most head coaches in the National Hockey League will tell you that's got to be points. That has to be points for my team. It wasn't for the Bruins that night in Buffalo. So what's different in New Jersey? Joe Sacco calls a timeout. And as he mentioned to Brick after the game, that we just needed our guys to settle down and get back to the script that made us successful and allowed us to build that lead. And they were able to push back and ultimately win the game 7-2. But I think it's some of those mental components that I think are so vital to see down the stretch with some of the new guys that the Bruins have brought into their roster.
Since we've referenced Brick's interview with Joe Sacco a couple of times, the first few minutes of this podcast, maybe we should hear his conversation after the Bruins 7-2 win of the Devils, and then we'll talk after that.
This stretch of games, given where you are in the standings and what's happening, there's the evaluation process going on with some of the young guys. If there's going to be a retooling in Boston, the young guys have to be part of that. They have to develop. They have to mature. Your thoughts on the performance from 2 of those guys tonight, those being Fabian Lysell and Fraser Minten?
Yeah, no, I thought that, and you're right, Brick. I think that, we're trying to put them in situations, give them an opportunity to show the organization, where they're at and what they can do possibly in the future. Tonight, I thought that Fabian had more confidence with the puck, looked like he was generating by moving his feet. To me, that's the biggest thing is in this game, you can't get planted. You have to continue to move your feet, make the plays at the right time and understand sometimes, make good decisions if there's nothing there. That's it, really. really what it comes down to. And I thought he was better at that tonight. And Fraser, again, tonight, I think if the last game in Buffalo, he was finishing up, a heavy workload of games, playing games in a row. But tonight he looked a little more rested. Did a much better job as far as playing on the right side of the puck. He makes good decisions for the most part, really in the right place at the right time on the right side of the puck, and he gets rewarded with a goal tonight.
And lastly, David Pastrnak, the last 3 games, 5 points, 3 points, 3 points. He's now at 100 for the season. What does that say about David the player and David the leader?
Well, it says he's a very consistent player in this league offensively. One of the top, drivers in the game. And to be able to do what he's done with everything that's kind of gone on this year, with all the changes and whatnot, it really says a lot about him. And he's done really an incredible job this year as far as being a guy that's carried a lot of the workload offensively. But we know that he's that type of player.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, Brick.
All right, we'll get to David Pastrnak, and we will hear from David Pastrnak coming up. But let's talk first about the young players that you asked Joe Sacco about, Brick. And Fabian Lysell, again, first NHL point, the assist on Casey Middlestad's goal. And Fraser Minten, who scored his first goal with the Bruins. Let's start with Minten. And, what stood out to me, just from my perspective, is he doesn't look like a 20-year-old out on the ice, Brick. He looks he carries himself as a much more mature player. He looks like he belongs. His physicality has stood out as well. Obviously the goal was nice, but there were a lot of little plays that he made, and I think you've referenced positionally. He looks like he belongs out there.
That's how you have to evaluate at this point in the year. He may not be with, say, 2 bona fide NHL wingers that have been in the league for a long time that can look out for a young player and make the player look better. So you have to focus in on how he processes the game when you're talking about Fraser Minten. Is he in the right spot? Is he supporting the defense in the defensive zone appropriately? Is his gaps good defensively? Is he supporting the puck on the breakouts? Is he making himself available? Is he in position? Does he understand, where to be, when to be, and how to get there at the NHL level? And I think that's the stuff that jumps out at you. To me, he does. He does. I think he's been the most impressive of any of the call-ups this year in terms of processing the game, understanding the game, and knowing the position that he plays. We've been looking for some strong center ice play all year long. The Bruins have talented players that have played in the middle, but it's a far cry from the Bergeron-Krejci days. Even Charlie Coyle as a third-line center, especially in 19. That's the formula. That's the lineup you're looking for. So you're looking for, a young player to come in, establish himself, leave an impression before the end of this season that I have a chance to be part of this roster next year, and not just part of a roster, but a guy that can be relied upon, depended upon, because I understand how to play the game, especially in the middle of the ice. And that's the stuff that gets me excited when I see a kid like Minten.
The other thing is he's still so young. He's 20 years old, and he's just going to get bigger and stronger. He's 6'2", about 195 pounds at this point. Again, we haven't seen him across an 82-game grind. How does he hold up to the National Hockey League schedule and some of the matchups that the Bruins would put him in? But in this little snapshot, I think you can see how smart he is, how mature he is as a player, and it's promising to see the way he has played here in this very small sample size since he's come up.
I'm looking forward to getting to know him a little bit too, because he seems like an interesting guy. He's a young kid. There was a great article a couple of years ago when he was about ready to make his Maple Leafs debut. It was in The Athletic, and it talked about his background and how his grandparents were very influential in his life, and they wanted him to do more than just hockey. They wanted him to be well read. They gave him some books to read that typical teenagers don't read, and he also is classically trained on the piano, which I thought was very interesting as well. And so I had asked him, we had him on the bench interview, I believe it was before the game against the Sabres, and I asked him if he had been playing any piano lately since he got to Boston. He said, no, he said his keys are back home. So he hasn't gotten a chance to do that. But He seems like, we talked about, him looking like he belongs and thinking the game, and so it's interesting to hear, how he was brought up and seeing, knowing that and then seeing him play on the ice. I think that's pretty
for what it's worth, Adam, watching those interviews that you did, I think you did one or two at least with Fraser. He looks you in the eye, he answers your questions directly, and he references you by name. So to me, for a 20-year-old, that's a kid that's mature. He gets it. He knows how to communicate. He knows how to talk. He knows how to be an adult. And I think that translates into his understanding of the game of hockey. He looks like a hockey player, a 200-foot guy. And again, that makes you think that if you're going to have a young guy that's going to pop, that's going to hit, you think he's the leader in the clubhouse.
I don't know about you, but I had a conversation with Fraser actually before the game against the Devils, and I think in my time in the National Hockey League, I've never had a conversation about authors of books. But we were talking about Bill Bryson.
Wow.
And I don't know if you're a fan, but he's written some tremendous books. He rattled off a couple that he read. We were talking about A Walk in the Woods, which is a great book. But I think that gives you an illustration, to Brick's point, what he is like as a person and that maturity. And I think also perspective on the game and himself, where he fits. And I want to actually make that segue into Morgan Geekie. I know we're going to talk about David Pastrnak. But when you have a conversation with Morgan Geekie, I think he has a very healthy perspective on the game, on the way he plays, where he fits, why he's had success. And yesterday, he was one of the Bruins that hit a huge milestone, notching his 30th goal of the season.
Now, Judd, you and I could have had a conversation when I was playing about authors, if you wanted to. And I could have told you about an 8th grade book report I did on One Fish, Two Fish.
You know what? It didn't come up at the Portico about 30 years ago at Salt Lake City.
But to your point, and again, I sort of was talking about his upbringing and reading books again. That you don't teenagers don't typically read, especially this day and age, right? I mean, he's 20 years old. He was a teenager like a year ago, right? And so I think that's fascinating, and it's not many, and again, not many people, all right, that you could say, do that kind of thing. So that's really interesting on Fraser Minten's part. Again, looking forward to getting to know him a little bit.
Adam, can I go one step further? And this is where I want to get some observation from Brick. Mm-hmm. Over the years, Brick, I'm sure you saw many players either that you played with or you've seen now in your capacity as the Bruins analyst, and they had tremendous skill. They could skate, they had size, they could shoot the puck, they were tough, but they couldn't last in the National Hockey League. They couldn't really take those talents and make them coalesce into a terrific National Hockey League player. Just over the years, just how important it is that those 6 inches between your ears fuels your performance on a night-in, night-out basis. And that a lot of times, I don't know how you felt, separates players in the game.
Yeah. For me, it's very simple, Judd. The most important thing in hockey is the puck, and I talk about valuing the puck all the time. But the most important skill you can have is, do you have hockey IQ? Can you think the game? Because if you can think the game, I don't care what your skill set is. Whatever skill set you have is going to enable you to have a career. You're going to be an impactful, productive player if you can process the game, think the game, and understand all the moving parts and make your adjustments as you develop as a player. That's where it starts for me, and that's the first thing that I look for, and I think most evaluators look for is, can they understand the game and what's most important about the game and how you play? And then secondly, you mentioned, guys that are tough. Yeah, well, that's a great skill to have. Most hockey players are pretty tough. It's a rough and tumble game. But you got to have the mental toughness. You got to be able to handle failure. You got to be able to handle a bad shift and not let it ruin your night and affect the rest of your game. And if you don't have that, because it's a game of mistakes, everybody's going to make mistakes. Even the best players in the game, they turn the puck over. They make a high risk play and it goes the other way and it ends up in your net. You got to get beyond that. You got to be willing to get back out there and compete. And if you have those elements, those 2 or 3 elements at the very forefront of your resume as a hockey player, then you're somebody worth keeping.
And I would imagine as a young player, it's great if you have that mental toughness out of the gate. But, I would imagine, that takes some time to develop too, especially when you're getting to the NHL level, right? With game speeds up and, you were once great and now you're sort of trying to figure it out. That's got to be part of it as well, part of the maturation process, and not every player gets there.
Yeah, and you have to be open to coaching too, some of these guys that you played with, that you think they were bona fide NHLers, but they didn't want to hear the criticism. They didn't want to hear the constructive criticism. They thought that they had what it took and they were going to play their game their way because it's worked for them their entire life. But if you have that kind of stubbornness, you got to be open to coaching. You got to take your skill set and fit within the framework of the team because it's the ultimate team sport. And that's also another thing that hurts guys that can put up 100 points in the American Hockey League, but they're non-factors when they come to the NHL.
Let's take that even further. With Alexander Ovechkin, there was a great quote from Barry Trotz in The Athletic when he was talking about Alexander Ovechkin. He said a lot of high-end players, they can't take hard coaching. Alexander Ovechkin could. There are a lot of guys that if I tried to do some of the things that I did with Ovechkin and they were high-end players, they were done. They just couldn't accept it. And Alexander Ovechkin was one of those guys who also needed to learn some of that stuff in order to win a Stanley Cup. And I think that's what winning players are all about. It's not only being able to do that on a night in, night out basis as a strong player, both mentally and physically in the league, but now you have to take it one step further to take your game and become a winning player within a team.
Yeah, and you guys know this, and if you've been around the game at the NHL level for any period of time, there will be coaches that will challenge or criticize or call out publicly their star player, whether it's accurate or not, just to make a point. And you have to have that player, not only because he's what he is in terms of production and leadership, but he's got the thick skin to be able to handle it. Understand that there's a message being sent to the team through me as the player that, is one of the leaders and one of the top guys on the team in order to get that message across. And if you don't have that part of your, makeup as a hockey player, you're not going to be a leader, and that tactic will not be successful.
I would imagine too, and we've talked about this, and we've talked about what's next for the Bruins, and you talk about the culture, right? And you talk about the players in the room, and I would imagine, the not only being able to take instruction from a coach, but being able to take instruction from your teammates as well is important.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best messages you can send. And I use the same example all the time, and I don't know if I've shared it on one of these podcasts already, but in '92 I was playing on a line with Vladimir Rizhishkin and Stevie Leach, and we were on fire. We were, it was a rough year, that '92 season. We ended up going to the conference final, losing to Pittsburgh, and they ended up winning in the final for winning the Stanley Cup. But we went through 55 players. We didn't have Neely for more than 8 or 9 games, so it was a real challenge for Rick Bowness, the coach. But I was playing on that line, and we were hot. We were getting a lot of power play time because we were scoring. We had some chemistry, had some magic. And Bones would say to me, he'd say, "Hey, Brick, I need you to tell Rosie to do this and this in the defensive zone." And I would say, why you telling me? You're the head coach. You tell him. He goes, "No, it'll be more impactful if it comes from you." Mm-hmm. And that was a lesson for me to learn about coaching. Once I thought about it and realized and I saw how it worked, then it was a learning moment and a teaching moment for me.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and it doesn't matter what sport you play, what level you play at. If you get, it's one thing to hear from the coach. When you hear from your teammate, it's much more impactful. You listen, right? Yeah. Especially if you respect, that teammate. So, interesting stuff. Stream the entire Sox season with a NESN 360 annual plan available at an all-new reduced price of just $20 a month, paid annually, and for a limited time, get 4 free tickets to Fenway with your purchase. Visit NESN360.com to sign up today. Adam Pellerin, Andy Brickley, Judd Sirott here with you on episode number 54 of the Hockey Hub podcast, talking about the Bruins win over the Devils, talking about some of the young players that contributed. We talked about Fraser Minten. Fabian Lysell. Let's talk about Lysell's night. Picked up his first NHL point on the Casey Middlestat goal, playing on that line with Pavel Sacco, who was just recently, over the last couple of games, moved down to the left wing. Middlestat centering that line. Joe Sacco had talked about balancing out the lineup, wanted to see what he had in Middlestat, giving him a veteran in Sacco on his left side, and somebody who has experience at the center position as well, obviously, and a young player in Fabian Lysell. Fraser Minten stood out, and I think Fabian Lysell stood out in this game, Brick.
No question. Game 9 of his NHL career, and it was by far his most noticeable in all the right reasons. And I think Joe talked about it. It's in his skating game. If you bring your skating game, good things will follow, especially a player like him who has an offensive bent to his game. He's productive in the American League. He's proven he's a good player down there. Can that translate to the NHL? Well, it all starts with his skating. If he brings his skating game, then he has an opportunity. He still has to learn technique, body position, how to battle for pucks along the boards, in front of the net, whatever it might be. He needs to get stronger. He needs to get sturdier. He still gets knocked down too much. All the stuff that a young, skilled, smaller guy has to learn in order to be an NHL player. But he stood out because he skated, he handled the puck, he tried to hang on to it, he tried to make plays, he had pretty good vision. He gained the blue line on rushes on probably 2 or 3 occasions, get a little taste of that second power play unit. Good signs. In the first game, really, Judd, that I felt like, wow, okay, this is what I've been waiting to see. Let's try to build off this.
And the other thing that Joe mentioned in the interview with you after the game was that the decisions were much better when he created some of those opportunities, whether that was to pass off and to whom, when, to shoot the puck. And just thinking about the conversation we're having about Lysell and Fraser Minten, guys develop at different rates. And for different reasons. Fabian just recently turned 22. We were talking about Fraser Minten, who is 20 years old. And I remember having a conversation on that long West Coast trip with Patrick Brown, who spent some considerable time with Fabian in Providence. And one of the things he said is he is starting to get it. And I think one of the big challenges, not just for the Bruins, but for every organization in the National Hockey League, is how patient can you be with especially some of your young players? Fabian Lysell is starting to get it. I think a lot of people, because they see, oh, he's 22. This is his third year pro. It's time for him to get it. It doesn't always work that way with every single player. So if you're in management, how do you properly assess the player and then look at him within the context of your team moving forward? But certainly the game that we had a chance to see from him in New Jersey, that's encouraging. Now you got to do it again against the Blackhawks.
And I would go back to that point about the skating game. And this isn't apples to apples because they're totally different players, even though people want to make a connection. David Pastrnak, when he was a younger player, when he kind of slowed his game down, the skating game, when he kind of stood around to try to get a spot in the offensive zone to create a scoring chance, the brain doesn't work as fast. And that's the way I look at Lysell. If he brings his skating game, all of a sudden the hockey IQ is at the same level. It's at the same pace. When you stand around and watch and try to figure out the league, you're done. You're not going to be an effective guy. So I think Joe's point about, he brought his skating game, which allows him to think the game at a faster pace, which makes him a better player.
Is it easier, and easy may not be the right word, for a player like, we talked about Fraser Minten earlier, and we talk about his size, right? 6'2", 195, big kid, he's physical. And then you have a player like Fabian Lysell, a great skater, skill player. Is it easier for the Fraser Mintens to adjust to the NHL game quicker than a skill player like Lysell typically?
Absolutely. But what goes with that, Adam, you have to take note of is awareness. You have to have, it's like a quarterback in the pocket. You have to have an awareness without even seeing, that defensive lineman coming from your blind side, but it's there, you feel it, it's coming. You have to have that awareness, on the ice, in the NHL, to know when and how to expect and how to absorb a hit. And I think young players, it's a tough learning curve, but I think Minton's already ahead of the game when it comes to that aspect of it.
And one more point beyond that, Brick, and I'm curious either if you've seen it as a Bruins analyst or when you were breaking into the National Hockey League. I think a lot of personnel guys will tell you, for a lot of young players, it takes a while for that player to understand, I am a National Hockey League player, and I am comfortable playing with these players at this level in the National Hockey League. And until they get to that point, then their play is going to fluctuate.
Well, the only thing I would add to that, Judd, is that the guys that come in, whether they're coming off a college campus, highly heralded, All-Americans, Hobie Baker finalists, or kids coming out of junior that are first rounders, they all come in thinking they're NHL players. They're NHL ready the minute they lace up their skates in the first day of training camp. It's how you react when reality slaps you in the face and says, this is different. And then how do you react to that really will ultimately determine, when you're going to be in the NHL, how you're going to be in the NHL, and how effective you're going to be in the NHL, no matter where you are in terms of, the status.
You're watching the Hockey Hub. And if you like what you hear, make sure to like and subscribe to the show. Hockey Hub can be found on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and wherever else podcasts are found. Adam, Judd, and Brick here with you. Episode number 54 of the Hockey Hub podcast. Talked about Lysell and Fraser Minten. Shout out Michael Callahan. First NHL goal. I mean, how cool is it to pick up your first NHL goal as a Franklin, Massachusetts native playing for the Boston Bruins? I mean, that's just awesome. And I was just, and again, I brought this up to our great producer, Brian Zaccello, and I don't think he heard me when I had asked him the question.
You didn't take it personally, did you?
No, I didn't. So I'm just going to call him out here on the Hockey Hub. I asked him how many players from Massachusetts scored their first NHL goal with the Bruins. Right? I don't know the answer to that question. I'd love to know because that's pretty cool. I know, Brick, obviously you being from Massachusetts, that wasn't your first NHL goal with the Bruins, but just scoring, a goal for the Bruins, being a Massachusetts kid, it's pretty special.
Well, I know I played with a couple of them that have done it.
Yeah.
Just off the top of my head,
Okay.
I would think Bobby Sweeney, right? Came out of D.C.,
sure. Yep.
Johnny Carter,
Yep.
right?
But how many? That's the question.
Well, I'm just saying I think their first NHL goals were in Bruins uniforms, and they're from Massachusetts.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Those are just two right off the top of my head.
Those are two right off the top of your head.
Right off the top of my head, yeah.
Yep.
Maybe Stevie Hines. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I've got that long list that I think we had a long
Teddy
discussion
Donato.
on the Wedstone, on the...
Did you find it?
Well, no.
okay.
So earlier this year in the National Hockey League, I asked the league's PR department, and they do a phenomenal job when you throw questions like this at them. I don't have that list of Massachusetts-born. I have the full New England players who have played for the Boston Bruins.
Yes.
Whether or not it's their first goal that they scored in the National Hockey League, that would take a little bit more digging. But I do have the full list.
I bet you Matt Grizzlick's on that list.
Sure.
Yeah, Grizz will be on that list. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah, all sorts of guys.
All right, so there you go. So that's something. Maybe we'll, something to have for the Blackhawks broadcast tonight. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. I'll have to do some digging. But let's get to number 88 and number 39 for that matter. But I thought it was fitting, that David Pastrnak picks up his 100th point on an assist to Morgan Geekie, who picks up his 30th goal. I mean, that was just great. Those two have played so well together, particularly since January 1st. Pastrnak leading the league in goals. I'm not sure. He might be leading the league in points since January 1st.
Yes and yes.
He is, yes. So passing Nikita Kucherov, because at the start of the game against the Devils, he was 1 point behind Kucherov. So Pastrnak hitting the 100-point mark for this third straight year. Before we get your thoughts, let's just hear from David Pastrnak after the Bruins win. David, I know the season hasn't gone the way you wanted it to, but how important was it to have a fun night like this?
Yeah, definitely a good win for our group, especially after their pushback in the second, they came back. We took a time out of the group and extended the lead, so I think that was credit to us, and it's a good team over there, so good win.
Yeah, Mike Callahan scores his first NHL goal. You got Fraser Minten scoring his first goal as a Bruin. Fabian Lysell gets his first point. Nice to see the young guys contribute too.
Yeah, 100%. You obviously could see the last couple of games that with each game that they get, they're feeling more comfortable with the puck and around the room. So definitely good for them to get on the score sheet as well. And how I said earlier, I can't wait to see what they bring next.
You reached the 100-point milestone for the third straight season. Only Phil Esposito and Bobby Orr have done it in more consecutive seasons. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's I'm always the offensive player. That's where that's what I'm supposed to do. So obviously, very honored. It's not easy in this league, but at the same time, I feel like that's my job. Obviously, I wish it would be under better circumstances, but you know what? obviously it's good, but nothing changed for me. There's only one thing that I'm chasing.
Congrats on the milestone. Congrats on the win.
Thank you.
And he had his streak of factoring in on 13 consecutive goals snapped, and I think Jacob Lauko heard from him on the bench, as you referenced, Rick, after he scored that goal. But we've talked so much about David Pastrnak hitting another milestone now. Just incredible what he's done, under the circumstances too. I think too, Brick.
Yeah, my takeaway from that interview with you, Adam, was how even keeled he is about this accomplishment. And the firm grip or grasp he has on what he means to the team and what's important to him. For him to say that this is what's expected. It's expected by the organizations, the fans, and myself as a player. And it's my job to be productive. I love that. I love that mentality. I love that approach. I love that frame of mind. And that came across strongly to me in that interview.
I thought... to echo that, tremendous. Loved what Pasta had to say. Loved the perspective that he has. The other thing that he brought up, and Adam, I don't know if it was in an interview with you or Razor, on this, run he's had here in the last couple of games. But one of the things that stood out was I have that competitiveness in my body.
Yeah.
And you have seen that here on the ice. He has exploded. I think prior to the last 3 games, we could have debated, is David Pastrnak going to get 100 points? Is he going to get to that level? Is it important to him? And all of a sudden, not only did he hit the gas pedal, he just smoked the competition in order to be able to hit the century mark. And if you just look at the numbers, since you brought up what he's done since January 1st. So he has 63 points in 40 games. Math is not my strong suit, but 126 points. If you multiply that across a full season, now you're talking about levels that the Bruins haven't seen for a long time. We're talking about Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito. Esposito was the last guy with 126 or more points, but it's a very short list. Espo, Oates, Bobby Orr. That's it. If he was able to do that across a full season. And one of the things that Brick and I touched on last night, if the power play were just a little bit more successful, he would easily be challenging Nikita Kucherov and Nathan MacKinnon for the league scoring lead, which would be incredible considering the weapons that those guys have versus the weapons that David Pastrnak has. And he is the sole, and that whole line is the central point for every team. We have to shut down that line. If we shut down that line, I think the Bruins are going to have an opportunity to score, and he is still producing.
Yeah, and as good a year as Geeky's having, if you went around and polled people and say, all right, give me your top dynamic duos in the National Hockey League, I don't think you'd hear Pastrnak and whoever in the conversation, despite the year that he's had, right? No. This isn't like Point Kucherov, right. Pick your guys, right, whatever they might be, but... I just think what he's been able to do with Lindholm not being a good fit early in the year and having Sacco kind of play out of position, and I say that, tentatively because he can play just about anywhere. That I like his game, but he's not like a true number one center. It's not like it's not Peterson and Middleton out there. You know what I'm saying? So. For what he has done, and without that power play success for the team, is truly amazing. It might be his best season to date.
Yeah,
with the production that he's had.
You got to start. Well, you already are hearing. Every time you talk about a David Pastrnak milestone, you always hear like Phil Esposito, Bobby Orr, Rick Middleton, like all these great players in Bruins history, and that's just going to continue moving forward. I mean, he's knocking on the door of 400 goals. He'll get there next year. He's just climbing quickly up on the list at an incredible rate. But, I just like the maturity to his game too, Brick. You see that unfolding. I mean, we talked about the passing ability, but, I think there was a time where you talk about, being responsible with the puck. And that happens with the high-end players, right? They're trying to make plays. They commit turnovers. But I don't see that with David Pastrnak as much.
Yeah, and they get a little extra rope because of the way they play,
right.
And that's understandable. It's okay to have a double standard when you have a superstar like that. But, just to agree with what you're saying, because the room has changed, the dynamic has changed, the leadership has changed, the room is different And they need him. They need his voice, and they need his lead by example. And I think maybe 5 years ago you wouldn't have gone down that road with David Pastrnak, because he was a fun-loving, goal-scoring, high-entertainment guy that really didn't give you that impression that he was going to be a future leader of this team when it came to in the locker room. Certainly on the ice and being productive and scoring goals and winning hockey games. But now there's more responsibility to what is asked of him. And it's been truly impressive the way he's responded, despite the fact that the Bruins are not going to be a postseason team.
And the way that he's picking up points, maybe the first goal is a really good example. It's not as though he's cherry-picking for opportunities or he's just dangling out there and completely defensively deficient. Last night, he's in a perfect position to pick off a puck that's errantly sent. Well, Hughes tries to go up the wall along the near side to Jesper Bratt. Ken Danico, I think, felt Bratt should have helped out a little bit more. I think Luke Hughes had a problem handling that puck.
What does Dano know? Come on.
He was also under pressure, but Pastrnak in a perfect spot to pick that off defensively in the middle, in a good spot, races in and rifles it by a guy who had been hot, and Jacob Markstrom.
Yeah, and also, Judd, there are times when you stretch the neutral zone, and Pasta's good at that. He gets breakaways. But there's a time to come back underneath and demand the puck. And we've seen more of that from him, I think, in the second half of this year than we've seen throughout his career. And I think that's another growth stage for him. He understands that this is the better play, this is the better decision, this is where you don't turn the puck over, you shorten up the passing route, and you get the puck in your hands when you're generating speed through center ice. Now you have options. And I see more and more of that in his game now, which is, again, another sign of maturity.
And Adam, in a bigger picture, because you brought up Elias Lindholm. And again, they were put back together. This is a small sample size, so remember to keep that in perspective. But Lindholm the other day said, listen, there is something there. There is absolutely something there, and it could be something to build off when you look ahead to the summer and starting next season. David Pastrnak mentioned the other day when he spoke in New Jersey about what may not have worked at the beginning of the season with Elias Lindholm and what is now starting to work. He said there are so many different things that were going on at the beginning of the season. And the first thing that he mentioned was, I was not on my game and I was not completely healthy. And then you have Elias Lindholm coming in. It's a new team, and he wasn't completely healthy. But they put them together in the first 10 or so games, and it didn't work out. They were broken up by then coach Jim Montgomery and only recently put back together. But it's something that really bears watching here in these last few games.
Yeah, I don't know what the offseason is going to look like for the Bruins, but, if you're looking ahead to next year, you like what you see, right? Because to your point, Judd and Brick, this was the original plan, right, to have Elias Lindholm and David Pastrnak together on that line. And, I think you see the little details, Brick, right, as you like to point out in Elias Lindholm's game. Just that first goal, right, and you pointed it out on the replay and putting along the wall, who was it in an awkward position? Who was it leading to the first goal? Lindholm.
Hughes and Bratt.
Yeah, thank you. In a position that led to the turnover and the ultimately the Pastrnak goal. It's things like that, the details in Lindholm's game that stand out too.
Well, there's no question that the Bruins are in the trade market and the free agent market, and depending on what that roster construct looks like next training camp, you can envision Lindholm and Pastrnak playing together from day one. But depending on what comes in terms of forward help inside the top six will also impact what the combinations might look like.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Again, Morgan Geeky's a restricted free agent too, so hitting the 30-goal mark for the first time in his career, which was pretty cool. All right, for the biggest trending news in the sports world, check out Boston Has Entered the Chat, hosted by George Bellecci, Travis Thomas, and Casey Hudson, available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and wherever else podcasts are found. All right, Adam, Judd, and Brick here with you the last few minutes of our show. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the goaltender, right? And Jeremy Swayman. And obviously not the year that he wanted, not the year that the Bruins wanted. But, as of late, we've seen a lot better play out of the Bruins goaltender, which, again, you're talking about looking ahead to next year. It's an encouraging sign moving forward and looking forward to, Swayman having a normal offseason, right, and getting himself ready for the year, because last year was not the case, and to see him play like this, and his offseason, we'll start on April 16th like the rest of the Bruins, and hopefully this is a springboard for things to come.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that, Adam. If you're a team that's out of the playoff structure and you got 6 or 7 games to go and you rattle off 7 wins, I don't think that carries over to the following season. I don't believe in that. But I think good individual play can. And I think for what Pastrnak was able to do, what do you have, 11 points in his last 3 games to get to 100 because he was totally determined that was one of the goals that he was going to reach, that's impressive. And I'll put the other very important player in the Bruins' future is their goaltender, Jeremy Swayman. And what he has been able to do, I think, over the last several games is similar in terms of his ability to stop the puck, track the puck, think the game, and get back to a level that he expects of himself, that we expect of him. And I think that can have a carryover effect, particularly because the dynamics will be different next training camp. They won't be anything like they were this year. So that makes you hopeful that those two players, because of what they've done down the stretch here, can have a carryover next year, not necessarily the wins and losses.
I think Jeremy Swayman is going to look back at the 24-25 season and say this was a massive learning experience for me from start to finish. And the way that he is ending, and again, who knows how many more times we're going to see him here before the end of the regular season. The Bruins only have a handful of games left. But to go here in April with a .919 save percentage, the way he's played, the stops he's made, how calm he's been in net, it's a very good sign for the Bruins to enter the offseason. But I think to Brick's point, it's almost like if you want to transfer this to baseball, a lot of people don't believe in momentum in baseball. Momentum in baseball is your next day's starting pitcher. So let's see how he begins the season. But if he's able to end the season the way he's played here in April, it will certainly be promising for him heading into the offseason.
Yeah, a learning experience in terms of being the guy, right? I mean, for the first time in his career, at the National Hockey League level, he is the number 1 goaltender, and that was a big storyline going into the year, which was sort of overshadowed a little bit at the beginning of the year because of the contract situation. Didn't know his status, didn't know if he was going to be a member of the Boston Bruins. But then, once the season started, that once again was a big question, and I think it's interesting, to see how he learns from this moving forward, Brick.
Yeah, it's when you're an elite athlete and you miss time, particularly in training camp, you don't think, and this goes to the learning curve, you don't think it's a problem. I got this. I trained with a college team, but, hey, I know what I'm doing. I'm the man. We traded the other goalie, and we, the tandem came apart, but it was expected. They weren't going to pay their goalies $12 million, or whatever it was, $13 million, whatever the number was. You expected some kind of transaction. It came, and then the holdout followed. But as the athlete says, I got this. It's not a problem. You get back into the fold. You're back with your teammates, and it's different. You're not on top of your game. It's NHL. It's NHL quality. You're getting beat, and now you can't get traction. You try to put the extra work in, but where it hurts you is in your head. And you can't find it. You can't find it no matter what you do, and it snowballs in the wrong direction. It starts to spiral, and then you start to win a couple of games. You're a little bit better. You think, okay, I got the, and then it goes back, and the play in front of him compounds the issue because the Bruins didn't have what they usually have. Great layers defensively, good decision-making without the puck, good strength down the middle. They had some injuries on the back. All that stuff was working against Swayman. So you hope that the learning process was a successful one, and the only way we'll find out is his performance come next September, October.
And if we're putting a bow on this season and then looking ahead to next season, and this is something that the GM Don Sweeney and the president Cam Neely had talked about, two things. When it came to the holdout, he said reps are reps, and this does not benefit anybody, whether it's Jeremy Swayman or the rest of the team. And the other thing that I keep thinking about is that the Bruins did not have a very good training camp. They did not have a very good preseason. There were a number of different reasons for it, and because of that, they didn't get off to the start that they wanted. And now we're in a position where the Bruins are going to miss the playoffs in the first time in 9 years. That cannot happen next year.
Yep. Just a couple of games left this season. 3 games left, 2 on Nesson beginning tonight against the Chicago Blackhawks. Always good to talk to you, gentlemen. Thanks for coming on the Hockey Hub. All right, we'll get ready for the game tonight. Again, pregame coverage kicks off at 6.
I think Adam McQuaid would have been proud of that.
Episode 54, Adam McQuaid. Right here. Thanks for joining us on the Hockey Hub. We'll see you next time.